Greetings and welcome to In-Depth. I'm Dike Rostant. Globally, there is a rising demand for refrigeration and air conditioning equipment as people try to beat the heat. But ironically, this type of equipment can tend to utilize material that can also lead to global warming. But there's a project in TNT that aims to combat that though. And to tell us more about it, we have UNDP manager Anselm Simon joining us. Mr. Simon, how you do, sir?
I'm fine. Thank you for having me.
And I want us to start off by getting an idea of what the energy efficiency in, is it RAC project is all about?
Yes, it's RAC, which is the acronym for refrigeration and air conditioning. So, as you have mentioned, as the globe warms, the need for the transition from having air conditioning as a luxury to a necessity has occurred. Right, so we've seen an increase in the need for cooling, space cooling, and also cooling as it relates to the cold chain or provision or preservation of food, pharmaceuticals, etc. So Trinidad would have signed on to two major international agreements, one being the Montreal Protocol. This seeks to reduce and eliminate chemicals that would contribute to the depletion of the ozone layer, and also what we call UNFCCC, the United Nations Framework Convention Against Climate Change. This one deals more with global warming and greenhouse gas emissions. With that said, this project, energy efficiency through low carbon technology, seeks to tackle both protocols or agreements, right? Introducing energy efficient refrigeration and air conditioning technologies into Trinidad and Tobago. Our overarching aim is to, create a market change, push us towards that type of technology. To do that, the project is deploying three major components, right? The first one seeks to synergize legislation and policy infrastructure across different ministries to ensure that the government leads in this transition. It also looks at providing capacity development for the refrigeration and air conditioning sector. I mean, of course, in introducing new technology, we want to make sure that the sector is able to support it, right? We've implemented policies like the minimum energy performance standard through the support of the Trinidad and Tobago Bureau of Standards, which essentially dictates or specifies the energy efficiency of cooling equipment that enters into Trinidad and Tobago as one of the deliverables under component one. The second component deals with, is actually the proof in the pudding. We have 5 small demonstration projects which highlight the implementation of this type of technology on a small scale. So you're looking at small applications like split units, like what you have in your home. And we also have 2 large pilot projects, one in Point Research, Trinidad, and the second in Marabella, Trinidad. This utilizes a more commercial application of energy efficient technology called district cooling. And our third component is a component that seeks to educate the society within Trinidad and Tobago at every level, from policymakers to the man on the street, to influence that type of decision. So for persons who already have this type of technology deployed in their home, all well and good, it will provide additional information for them. Or for the person who is just about to change out this type of technology, we want to be able to influence their decision. And for, of course, the persons and businesses that are now looking to purchase these type of technologies, we want to influence that type of decision to be more energy efficient and environmentally friendly.
Mr. Simon, one of the things that I got from you from the get-go was it seems as though this is not something that is pointing fingers, like you are using this technology which is not good for the ozone layer, which is, there's the understanding, okay, well, this is the situation that we're trying to deal with, but there are different ways to treat with that situation, and some are a little more ideal than others. And I appreciate that. But anytime you're trying to have this sort of behavior change, there are so many people who are involved to make it take place. So you spoke about legislation, you spoke about building the infrastructure so that people, when they get the new technology, there are people who can service them. So I want you to tick off some of those individuals who are itemized along that place. Who are some of the partners involved in this?
Okay, so DK, we have been fortunate. Our journey with this project actually started in 2017 on the heels of what they call the Kigali amendment to the Montreal Protocol, where we shifted focus from just focusing on ozone-depleting substances, but also to include substances that cause greenhouse gases and global warming. And from then to now, we've been able to partner with regulators like the Bureau of Standards, Customs and Excise, Ministry of Trade, Ministry of Public Utilities, under the governmental umbrella. And we've also been able to partner with private sector entities who are so minded, to fulfill that level of corporate social responsibilities. We've also been able to partner with training providers like University of the West Indies, UTT, and some of the players within the technical and vocational education and training space, like School of Refrigeration and Air Conditioning, MIC, Institute of Technology, and many, many others.
Even moving forward, it's one thing to try to sway hearts and minds in terms of people who will be purchasing units for their personal or commercial use. How does this project aim to influence investors, people who are selling units? So yes, I'm going to start looking at these alternatives now, or even if these are the ones that I have in stock already, I may try to phase out their use. What is that conversation like?
Okay, so to influence that drastic type of change, as I've mentioned before, through the Bureau of Standards, we'll be implementing a minimum energy performance standard. So for importers and buyers of this type of equipment, soon they'd be limited to a certain specification of refrigeration and air conditioning equipment. Also, on our first component, through our review of legislation and other instruments that exist, we are seeking to implement things like incentives for the purchase of these types of equipment, and also influence things like public procurement policy.
I'm glad it seems as though you have both carrot and stick in terms of, yes, incentives, but at the same time, this is what you're allowed to do. But then we have about 2 minutes on this side of the conversation, and I want you to break down cooling as a service concept, please. What is that concept about?
Okay, so cooling as a service is twinned to what we call district cooling, where you provide cooling to customers. So it removes the initial upfront cost of consumers like myself and UDK from having to purchase air conditioning equipment. So we'd have a central plant producing chill water or cool air in some cases. And this would now be distributed to different areas. It could be households, it could be apartment buildings, it can be, a government campus, for example. And on the consumer side, they would pay a small fixed fee for the amount of cooling that they utilize or require. Right? Cooling as a service overall reduces the cost for construction, because most studies show that 10% of the cost for construction is usually the air conditioning and refrigeration equipment. Right? So if you're able to take away that cost and have it provided by a separate entity, the cost is directly affiliated to you. And the cooling as a service agreements would require a certain level of uptime for this type of cooling system. So it encourages the cooling provider to ensure that his equipment is efficient, it's well maintained, right? Which also reduces the maintenance cost for you as the consumer as well, right? But it also provides an opportunity for investors and banks, because of the scalability of district cooling and cooling as a service. They could actually, as investors or banks, have a situation where they have a revolving line of credit to these project developers, because they could start off with a 3-building complex and this could scale to something that could span acres.
But this is something that we're going to get into on the other side of the conversation, because I think you're going to have to read and spell for me a little bit with regard to this concept that you're breaking down. But stay with us. We are speaking with UNDP Project Manager Anselm Simon. We return with more. Welcome back. We are going in depth on a raft of things dealing with refrigeration and air conditioning. We're doing so with UNDP Project Manager Anselm Simon. Just before we took the break, you started to break down cooling as a service concept, and you said that was kind of twinned with the district cooling technology. Now, I want to pick up from a point you were speaking on, though. Much of the cost goes into cooling infrastructure when you're building many times, but cooling as a service concept can help to mitigate that cost. But how does that work if you're dealing with an apartment complex or somewhere where you want that cooled air that you would have purchased to be able to pass? How does that work?
Okay, so think about apartment complex. Usually with an apartment complex, you would either do split units, which are scattered all about the building, right? But are costs associated with every split unit you have across the building. Or in some cases, you'd have a situation where you think ahead and develop central air conditioning, right? These units are usually mounted, top mounted and basement mounted. So that will take up space on the roof of the building and also take up space on the basement of the building, right? But district cooling, the cooling plant is located off-site or is a building in itself, right? This allows you to free up space within your building one that you can now lease and sublease or generate more business from, right? Also, with the central cooling plant being off-site, it's not your direct responsibility. So you as the apartment building owner or even the consumer is not responsible now for the, let's say, bi-yearly servicing of that equipment, or in the case of the consumer, in the purchase of that type of equipment, because all the cost is now borne by the cooling as a service provider.
And is it a matter of, so I think I'm starting to understand a little more, so there will still be need for holes, want of a better term. You might have trunking, you might not, but even in terms of like servicing equipment, the service provider does that, as opposed to having to go to the person in flat A, B, or 1-4 to service their specific thing at their cost. Am I correct in that supposition?
Yes, you are correct.
And well, I'm grateful. So it's okay. So it's working on me. But one of the things that you also spoke about is scalability. Now, when you talk about scalability, I can hear some early adopters saying, okay, well, this is something that I might want to invest in. I can see it making money for me. How does one go about investing in district cooling, in cooling as a service concept? Okay,
so the starting point for any cooling as a service situation or concept starts with the identification of a location, right? Internationally, you have a kind of 50-50 split when it comes to where it's located, right? 50% in existing buildings, meaning that there would be some cost associated with renovation of the building to accommodate, or the other 50% looks at brand new infrastructure, right? So I'd speak to brand new infrastructure. Right, the example that you would have raised is apartment building. So let's say in an apartment building complex, the developer would have identified, let's say, 5 apartment buildings in the initial scenario, but they have, let's say, a couple acres to develop. Right, in a situation like that, they could start off with a district cooling plan that could either meet or exceed the requirements of the existing, and basically add on a modular basis to that system, right? The district cooling plant would comprise of cooling equipment and pipes to the different locations, coupled with what we call energy transfer stations. So the pipes, the cooling utility would provide cold water that will be piped to the different buildings, And basically that would be the medium for heat transfer. So the warm air within your room would transfer heat to the chilled water or the heat exchanger, and it will cool your room and then pipe that back to the central production plant, right? So what you'd see happening is if there's expansion, let's say another 5 apartments, you just add on another module, another system, and then tap into that same flow and distributes the chilled water to the new establishments within new buildings.
Now, you started off talking about the new stuff, Mr. Simon, and I appreciate why you may have done that, because sometimes when you talk about retrofitting can be sometimes is a bad word. So in the same way that solar power can sometimes be prohibitive in terms like initially, but then it works out for yourself, you earn that money back. What kind of figures are we talking about? Is it the same scale? What is that process like? And is there anyone to do that locally as yet in Trinidad and Tobago?
Well, from our research, there are entities that would have done it either in Trinidad or regionally, right? For older or existing establishment, there'd first have to be a preliminary feasibility study, right? Would look at the feasibility of the site. That would then move into a technical study, which would now identify what type of retrofits are required, what type of construction costs might be required. And then the third study would be a business case or business model, right? All of which could happen simultaneously, as we would have seen with the 2 pilot sites that we have identified in Trinidad, right? So based on that now, you would now gauge whether or not a site is feasible or is able to take it. You'd have all the cards on the table, and as a project developer or financial institution, you'd be able to, make that type of decision. And as part of the capacity development that we have as part of the project, we actually had 2 weeks ago a training program for financial institutions and also project developers to help them be able to identify and reduce the risk associated with investing in these types of projects. So once you get to the stage where it's deemed feasible, then you move forward.
And in terms of that moving forward, though, because we have about 2 minutes more, Mr. Simon, and I really want to get this question in. It's one thing to say, okay, well, there's training, there's capacity building for financial institutions to be able to treat with this sort of situation. But while we also want individuals to buy into the possibilities of the system, you also want people who can service these sorts of things. So is there any conversation, is there any work that is happening at this point in time with institutions of learning, so that while you have people who can fix, you also have people who are saying, well, this is a career choice that I want to get into?
Yes. So as I mentioned before, we've been fortunate to be able to partner with a cross-section of stakeholders, including some of the training institutions and academia. Currently, we are in discussions with the University of Trinidad and Tobago for inclusion of district cooling and this cooling as a service concept into their renewable energy program. They have certificate, diploma, and master's level programs. So we're in discussions with them for inclusion. We're also in discussion with the other institutions like UE, School of Refrigeration and Air Conditioning, MIC, and other training providers for inclusion of things like energy efficient technology, installation, maintenance, etc. And as part of that, the project would have actually imported 8 hydrocarbon training units, right? Hydrocarbon training units are essentially your split units, right? But with the modality to allow for modification, training, simulation, right? We would have provided these training units to the institutions I mentioned previously. So far, it's 7 distributed in Trinidad and 1 distributed in Tobago.
And I'm really glad you said that they're able to run simulations, different situations that people can work, because anybody who learns something just in theory, I don't want them working on my business, Mr. Simon. but thank you very much for taking the time to bring some of these things across, and hopefully we're able to find out a little more. But in that last 15, 20 seconds, where can people find out more about it, start to avail themselves, get some more information?
Okay, so we have social media handles for Facebook and YouTube, the Energy Efficiency in RAC project, and also on Instagram EE Interact. So you could look out for us on those social media handles, and we keep you guys informed as we roll out the project that ends in 2024.
And we'll continue looking at the energy efficiency in RAC project, doing so with project manager Anselm Simon. Thank you so much, sir. And on behalf of the entire TTT News team, I'm Dike Rostant. This has been In Depth with me. Thank you so much for joining us.